When one is examining any experience in the history of the church, even as something as complex and filled with so much that we need to truly seek greater truth and reconciliation, where we need to look back and really reflect on the relationship with the Indigenous people and do that with humility and a desire for reconciliation. But any experience of the church, you have to look at the spiritual perspective, the religious worldview of the time. And if you looked at it purely statistically, financially, number of baptisms and so on, one could say it was a failure. The coming of Europeans into the lands of the Indigenous people brought with them disease, unbeknownst to the Europeans, but wiping out huge numbers of the population. Not a total annihilation, but serious, particularly among the very young and the very old. Those two parts of society that are so important to us, to all of us as human persons. And then in combination with that, in this area, the Indigenous population was already in a series of conflicts and battles before the coming of the Europeans. So the Wendat Nation and the Iroquois nations surrounding it were in a constant state of battle, where villages were being attacked, or canoes on the river were being attacked, and goods being stolen and taken from both sides. And when the French came, and also the English later, and the Dutch, they had to choose sides, depending on whose relationship had developed with whom. And so the French were with the Wendat, of course, the English ended up being more the Iroquois, the Dutch, and so on. And so when the missionaries came, they were entering into this already existing place of conflict. And so you had these battles and the fear of death, of a village being attacked or something, that was a part of their reality already among the various Indigenous cultures. But then when you superimpose illness and the reduction of society, that is not good. Then on top of that, I think it is safe to say that in all my studies, I've never seen a body of people, a society, so deeply ingrained in a universal kind of spirituality that touched absolutely every aspect of their being. And so therefore, a conversation about the roots of that spirituality and coming to questions about God, Jesus, saints, creation narratives, versus the ones that had already developed, touched the society at a very deep level and created divisions. So that some people in a village had embraced Christ and were living an authentic and quite fulfilling Christian life from what we can tell, but maybe 2/3 of the village had not. And yet they have to live together in the same community and try and navigate that in a reality that is so deeply rooted daily in a spiritual life. So when you add those things together, and the fact that in the end the Wendat were basically losing the war with the Iroquois people, the society was broken up, damaged, dispersed. And ultimately the Jesuits themselves decided to burn down the mission of Ste. Marie, where they were working as their central mission, because they didn't want it becoming a base for the Iroquois to then use as a central place to then go out and just wipe out the rest of the Wendat villages. And so when you add all that up, the mission's burnt down by the superior himself, disease is everywhere, division in the community. Wow, you come to a conclusion. But for the fact that the missionaries and the Christians who embraced, the Wendat Christians who embraced the spirituality and a relationship with Christ, they understood in a fascinating way that suffering was an essential part of the human experience, and that struggle and adversity in life was opportunity, not to be sought out, but if well disposed, opportunity for enormous grace, and they take that from the life of Christ himself. And that was a big part. This kenotic sense of spirituality was huge. And so, in a certain sense, one could say there was a great success amidst all of the adversity that was faced. And I think that this was certainly the honest perspective of the missionaries and the Wendat Christians at the time, as they had to leave this land and go back to Quebec City, because they understood that if this was so for Christ, if it was so for the apostles, if it was so for the early Christians, then something good will come from this enormous struggle. And I think that's a sign of hope for us moving forward in reconciliation and healing, that there's always light, laboring, and grace, even in the most horrific of circumstances.